It's very troubling to me that there were so many observations. Oh, when the Trump people leave and you get the Bidens back, the adults will come back into the room. If this is adult behavior, please bring me some toddlers. Just recently, I flew back from Israel, spending several days there. And I got to tell you, it's been a very emotional experience being back twice now since the October 7th slaughter by the absolutely evil people of Hamas. It's a very difficult situation that the Israelis face, torn between wanting to visit with hostage families who've lost their loved ones. I also found myself wanting to help, however possible, to end this war of extraordinary hatred. We know and we've seen the proof of what the savages of Hamas did almost a year ago. We know that these madmen have been hiding behind the regular people, ordinary citizens of Gaza since then. Although let's never forget, those ordinary people voted Hamas to be their leaders. We've also learned that even as a deal was being negotiated to end the fighting, they assassinated, in cold blood murdered 6 hostages at close range, all of whom were hopefully close to being released. One of them, by the way, an American citizen. Listen to the mother of one of them, Rachel Goldberg, at her son's funeral.
It's not that Hirsch was perfect, but he was the perfect son for me. For 23 years, I was privileged to have the most stunning honor to be Hirsch's mama. I'll take it and say thank you. I just wish it had been for longer. Hirsch, for all these months, I have been in such torment and worry about you for every single millisecond of every single day. It was such a specific type of misery that I have never experienced before. I tried hard to suppress the missing you part, because that, I was convinced, would break me. So I spent 330 days terrified, scared, worrying, and frightened. It closed my throat and made my soul throb with third-degree burns. Now I no longer have to worry about you. I know you are no longer in danger. You are with beautiful honor. Okay, sweet boy, go now on your journey. I hope it's as good as the trips you dreamed about, because finally, my sweet boy, finally, you're free.
We're joined now by Mary Kissel, the right-hand advisor to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, now Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at Stevens Inc. I want to get into some of the situations that we face across the globe, because I don't know if the average voter is thinking about this, but they need to be thinking about the impact of who leads this country and how that changes the way that we're not only viewed by the world, but whether or not we have a position of genuine leadership or whether or not we're being taken for granted. I want to start with some of the countries that are problematic. Having just come back from Israel, I guess I have to tell you, I am beyond angry that it appears that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Anthony Blinken have put more pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to have some kind of ceasefire agreement than they have Hamas to release the rest of the hostages, 4 of whom are American citizens. Explain to me, what is this policy that we're trying to figure out from the current administration?
Well, as you rightly point out, it's a backward policy. It focuses on the democratically elected leadership of Israel rather than the terrorist group that is perpetrating the violence. And I think that you have to step back to understand why this White House is doing this. And it comes from misdiagnosing the problem in the Middle East, thinking that it is somehow Israel, when in point of fact, we know very clearly what the problem is. It's the Islamic State of Iran. It is the mullahs in Tehran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, just as it's been for the last 4 decades. And we've run several experiments with how to deal with Iran. We tried to give the job to the Europeans under the Bush administration to dialogue and appease, and that didn't work. So we imposed UN sanctions. We then tried appeasement full on. with the Obama administration. That didn't work. We saw only an increase in violence as we handed the regime funds. And then we finally landed on the formula that worked, which was under the Trump administration, where we imposed a maximum pressure campaign. We took the money away from the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Well, the Biden team reversed that, thinking that appeasement would work. It hasn't. And so you saw not just the violence in Israel, the horrible violence that you spoke of, but you saw the killing of American soldiers in Syria. You've seen launches of Iran-backed proxy groups on ships in the Red Sea. We've seen a very significant change there. You've seen attacks on U.S. servicemen and women in Iraq. You've seen the extension of Iran's drug and money laundering operations around the world. It's a very troubling situation. And unfortunately, it just comes back, as I said, where I started, to misdiagnosing the problem in the Middle East.
You know, the economy is uncertain. You never know whether your money's worth as much today as it was yesterday. It's one of the reasons I buy gold from American Hartford Gold. American Hartford Gold has earned a 5-star rating and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. Be sure to tell them Mike Huckabee sent you. They'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first qualifying order. Call 844-417-1010 or text Mike to 998899. You'll be glad you did business with American Hartford Gold. Mary, you really pointed out that which every American needs to understand. In the Trump administration, your former boss, Mike Pompeo, put a pressure campaign that didn't have to bomb Iran. It bankrupted them. They were broke. They didn't have money to give to Hezbollah and to Hamas and to the Houthis. Joe Biden came in and immediately turned on the spigots, took the sanctions away, and within a few months they had billions of dollars, and they didn't feed people with it. They built bombs, rockets, missiles, and they financed some of the most horrific violence against innocent civilians that the world has ever seen. I don't understand why the press doesn't push this harder. And I don't understand why the Biden administration, I know they're stubborn. They don't think Donald Trump did anything right. But on this, he did this right. Yeah, you know, if there's not a change, we're going to see more of the same if Kamala Harris were to be president.
Yes, that's true. It's absolutely incontrovertible that when you give money to this regime, they use it for terror. And they use it for terror because of the nature of the regime. And I think that that's where the Biden administration, the Obama administration went wrong. They thought, well, there are somehow moderates in Tehran, people we can deal with, we can talk to, we can conciliate, and we can somehow convince them to behave in a much more peaceful way so that we can achieve the outcomes that we want in the Middle East. And that's simply not true. And we've misdiagnosed regimes in the past. We misdiagnosed the communist regime in China, for instance. We misdiagnosed how to deal with the Soviet Union until Reagan came along. We have to understand the nature of the people across the table, and that's what Trump got right. For whatever reason, maybe it was all of his years of negotiating property deals in New York, dealing with some tough people, but he understood the nature of the regime and that you can't negotiate with them. It reminds me of Jean Kirkpatrick's famous essay, Dictatorships and Double Standards, where she said, not all regimes are the same, even authoritarian regimes. There are some that share your strategic interests, that you can talk to, that you can negotiate with, you can push them in the right direction, essentially. And then there are the regimes that are authoritarian, dictatorial, that don't share your interests and want to kill you. And you can't dialogue with those regimes. And that's really what the problem is with Iran. It has no interest in conciliating with the West. It wants to exterminate the Jews, and it wants to spread its Islamic revolution as far and as wide as it can.
It's very troubling to me that there were so many observations. Oh, when the Trump people leave and you get the Bidens back, the adults will come back into the room. If this is adult behavior, please bring me some toddlers, because the adults have messed up the world. And it's not just what's going on with the Iranians and Israel. That's certainly front and center, and especially for me, because of my longstanding relationship with Israel. But let's mention another neighbor in the region, Turkey. Erdogan is anything but a friend, and yet Turkey remains in NATO. I'm not sure that they have any place being in NATO anymore. I want you to address the complications of Turkey being a part of what's supposed to be a civilized type Western world, but they're far from being Western in their mindset.
Well, I think to address that, we have to step back again and talk about this transitional era that we're in. After the Cold War ended, the United States said, well, we don't have to be the world's policeman anymore. We can cut our military. We can spend the money on something else. And what we missed was the rise of powers like Iran, like Russia, like China, that want to dominate us. And we're seeing that now. And we unfortunately have had an administration that has allowed U.S. deterrence to erode. So now you're really seeing these regimes assert their power and work together. Now, the reason I say that is because, and I say it's a transitional period, is because the world is separating into different blocks. You're seeing a U.S. Anglophone, Western liberal bloc emerge versus a Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, you might even include Pakistan, bloc emerge. And then there are countries in the middle, like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, like Colombia in our hemisphere, that want to sit in the middle, don't want to take sides. And Turkey fits in that category. It is tied to the West, as you say, vis-a-vis NATO. It's also tied to the West simply because of its geography, straddling Europe and Asia. At the same time, Erdogan as a leader supports the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's done some very unfortunate things that run against our strategic interests. So really, to me, Governor, the question is not, should Turkey be in NATO? The question is, how are we going to get Turkey to side on our side versus the other?